I am not taking the PPT. I know it. Okay.
I'm sorry, Chief. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Sorry about it.
Okay. Now, when I will talk about the testing, then I will like you to understand. Number one is the degree of freedom concept, and number two, you should understand the level of significance. These are the two concepts. If you cannot understand these two concepts, then you will not be able to really test the hypothesis. And after that, you must know that there is something like type 1 error and type 2 error. So you should understand there is a type 1 error and there is a type 2 error. What exactly are these and what the difference is there between these two? Okay, so once we understand that, then I will also tell you one-tailed test. One-tailed test and two-tailed test. This is what I propose to complete under the hypothesis. Some portion I will take today and some portion I will take tomorrow. Now I start. All of you might have understood you must be knowing the definition of the research. And you must be knowing the attributes. You must be knowing the attributes of research. Now I want to take you from here. You know, if you understand the research, it comprises of two words, re and search. What is the meaning? Once you have searched, you are searching it again. Once you have got the solution of a problem and you are finding another solution of the problem. Right now, because of the COVID-19, you know that lot of countries, they are trying to conduct the research and to find out the vaccine which is more suitable to the human being and which can relieve them from COVID-19. So researches are going on. So if you want a research, there must be a problem. And if you do not have a problem, then of course you cannot conduct the research. So important is that you should have a problem. I think there is, I do not know what exactly is the. I'm sorry, please, I'm just closing.
Just double click on header, it will go.
Just wait. I'm just taking my another Word file. I think that will be all right. Yes, I have got another Word file. I'm sharing. This is.
So voice is not audible, sir? Yes.
Not audible. Are you not able to hear me now?
Now it is audible, sir.
It's okay. All right.
Yes, sir.
So now it will be. So first of all, research. And in this particular one, you should understand that you cannot proceed further without having a problem. I go to the doctor only and only when I have a problem. And if I do not have a problem, I will not go to the doctor. Lot of scientists are working to find out some remedy of COVID-19. The COVID-19 was not there in early 2019. It came up only in the late 2019 or early 2020. Now, before that, since the problem was not there, so people did not bother about it. Now, since this is the problem, so they are trying to find out the solution. And what are they doing? They are doing some activity. And it's not one activity, they are doing multiple activities. Without doing these activities, they cannot find the solution. And whenever the activities are done, they have to be done systematically. Or you can do, they can be done scientifically. Normally, the people in the science, they use the word scientifically, and people from social science and humanities, they normally use the word systematic. You know the meaning of systematic and you know the meaning of scientific. Systematic means that the activities are to be done in a particular sequence, and this sequence is well defined. So people know this. You know, when you take your bath, you know the sequence. When you make chapati, you know the sequence. When you are making any dessert, you know the sequence. So therefore it has to be done. And then there is a process when you do lot of activities, then it is called a process. Okay. And then you have a solution. So these are the 5 words which are very, very important, and I am just putting them right. And these words, if you put it in a particular sequence, in one sentence, that will become the definition of research. So research refers to a process wherein activities are carried out scientifically to find solution of the problem. Now, this is the definition of research which I have written, and this is the general definition. And in this definition, you see the 5 words. One is a process, so you know this. Another is activities. So one is process, other is activities. And then another is scientifically. And then another word is solution. And then another word is problem. And these are the 5 words which I told you. So this is the general definition of research. If you want to convert this definition into education, then you have to just change like this. I'm changing it for you. That research in education refers to a process wherein activities are carried out scientifically to find solution of problem related to some aspect of of education. This is the definition of research in education. So from the general definition, just see, you have now written the definition of research in education. If you want to write definition of research in economics, I'll just take one more example and then I will proceed. If it is economics, then I will say research in economics refers to a process wherein activities are carried out scientifically to find solution of problem related to some aspect of economics.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir,
Go ahead.
screen is not visible, sir. Screen is not visible, sir.
I think it is not visible.
No, no, sir.
Okay. Once again, I am again sharing. Is it all right now?
No, sir. Oh, yes, yes. Now it is okay, sir. It is okay. We weren't able to see that. Right. Now it is okay, sir.
I am only using the word file. I am not using PPT.
No, no, absolutely, sir. Word file only. Right, sir.
All right. So this is how I can define research in economics. Like this, you can define.
Voice is not audible, sir.
You can define research like this in any subject you like. There is absolutely no problem. Now I proceed further. Now you know there are you able to hear me now?
Right, right. It is audible, sir.
Okay. Now there are two words. One word is called discovery and another word is called invention. I'm sure you know both these words, and I'm sure that you can differentiate between these two words. And you know that for discovery, you cannot have a patent, and discovery cannot be repeated. Discovery is unsystematic in nature, and you cannot give any training in discovery. Invention is a part of research, and you can give training in conducting research, and during the process of the research, you may invent something. So invention is systematic in nature. Okay, now, since I have said that research is a process, since it is a process, so therefore there must be steps. So now I am telling you the steps of research. And one of the steps of the research is that you have to have a problem. So first step is identification of problem. Now, please understand, the first step is not the selection of problem, because identification is a broader one and selection is narrow. So selection is a part of identification. So therefore, never say that the first step of research is the selection of problem, but the first step of research is identification of problem. Now, as a researcher, you should know that when you are ultimately selecting, and when you are selecting, what are you selecting? You are selecting a problem. And when you are selecting a problem, what is another word for the problem? The another word for the problem is variable. So you can say you are selecting the problem. You are identifying the problems, and from those problems, you are selecting a problem for your research. So when you want to do this step number 1, you must have variable. Each research must have minimum 1 variable. So when you are selecting, you are really selecting the variable, minimum 1 variable. I have seen some of the people, they are writing the title, and in the title there is no variable. So how can you have a title without a variable? So minimum 1 variable, more you can have, depends upon you how many you want to have. Once you have selected a variable, then important is that you should be able to write the title. You should be able to write the title. And once you write the title, after that you should be able to write the objective, or let us say objectives. In some of the researches, people do not want to write the heading like objective. They like to write research question. So therefore, if you like, you can write the title, or if you like, you can write the research question. The choice is yours. So as a researcher, you have to first select the variable and then select the title. And after writing the title, then you should write your objectives, or you should write your research questions. And your objectives or research questions must be pinpointed. Your title cannot be pinpointed. Now, once you have written that, then the second step is formulation of hypothesis. Formulation of hypothesis is the second step. Please understand what exactly is a hypothesis. Let us see. See, hypothesis is the tentative solution of the problem. It is not a final solution. It is the tentative solution. Please understand. It is the tentative solution. This is one definition of hypothesis. Another definition of hypothesis is the intelligent guess about the solution of the problem. Please understand, it is not a guess. It is a tentative guess, not tentative, intelligent guess. Now, what is the difference between guess and intelligent guess? I'm sure when you were the students, during examination time, annual examination time, some of you might be referring to the question paper of the last 2 years, or last 4 years, or 5 years. Why were you referring to the past questions paper? because you are trying to find out if it is a research methodology, that what type of questions were asked in the last 5 years. Now, and then after that, after analyzing the last 5 years question papers, you might be deciding or thinking that most probably the question will be asked from this particular portion of the syllabus. And when you are doing that, this is what is the called intelligent guess, because it is based on the last 5 years question paper. If the last 5 years or 6 years question papers are not available, then it is not possible for you to have an intelligent guess. Then it is just a guess which does not have any base. So therefore, it is hypothesis is not the final solution, it is the tentative solution. So hypothesis is not a guess, it is the intelligent guess. And another definition is that hypothesis is the conjectural statement about the relationship between variables. Please understand, here I have said between variables. I'm not saying among variables. And when I'm saying between variables, means there are only 2 variables. Now, if you see here also, you see it's not final statement, it is a conjecture. And conjecture is again an intelligent guess. And this is intelligent guess about the relationship between the variables. Now, if you see these 3 definitions, then you find in the first definition, the hypothesis is a tentative solution, it is not final. From the second definition, it is the intelligent guess. So it's also not final, it's just intelligent guess. And in the third definition, you see it's a conjectural statement. So it's not final. You know, many a times when you are not well and you go to the doctor, then doctor will examine you, and after examining, the doctor may say that you are suffering from this disease. Now you start taking these medicines, but you should go to pathology lab and get these tests done. Maybe he will ask you that you get your blood test done, and in the blood testing you get these things. Now, why he is asking the patient to have these tests? Because he wants to be sure that whatever he is thinking, the patient is suffering from the same disease. So please understand very clearly. Now, without testing, he cannot be sure. So if he wants to be sure, it has to be tested. And that is why when you have a tentative solution, if you want final solution, it has to be tested. It is an intelligent guess. So if you want final solution, it has to be tested. So therefore, what you do is you have to test the hypothesis. And when you test the hypothesis, the testing has to be done with the help of statistical techniques. Statistical techniques. And you say, when you want to analyze the data with the help of statistical technique, you must have quantitative data. Now, please listen carefully. If you do not have quantitative data, then you cannot analyze with the help of a statistical technique, and then you cannot test the hypothesis, and then you cannot formulate the hypothesis. I repeat, if as a researcher you do not have a quantitative data, but you have a qualitative data, the qualitative data cannot be analyzed with the help of a statistical technique, and then you cannot test a hypothesis. And if you cannot test a hypothesis, then you cannot formulate the hypothesis. So in qualitative research, the formulation of hypothesis as a step will not be there. But if you have a quantitative techniques, quantitative data, which can be analyzed with the help of the statistical technique, and then you can test the hypothesis, and then you should formulate the hypothesis. I repeat this. As a researcher, if you have a quantitative data that can be analyzed with the help of a statistical techniques, and then you can test the hypothesis, and then you must formulate a hypothesis. So whenever you are doing a research where you have the quantitative information, the quantitative data, then and only then you should formulate a hypothesis. If you do not have a quantitative data, then you cannot formulate the hypothesis. So formulation of hypothesis is not compulsory. It's not there in all the researches. It is an optional step. It is not in all researches. Now, if you have a qualitative data which can be converted into quantitative, and then you can analyze with the help of a statistical technique, and then you can test the hypothesis. So that means if you have a quantitative data, or if you can convert the qualitative data into quantitative, then you can have a hypothesis. But if you have a qualitative data which cannot be converted into quantitative, then you cannot have a hypothesis. So that means hypothesis cannot be a step of research when qualitative data are collected. So if you know philosophy, in philosophy, the information or the data which you will have will be always qualitative in nature. So whenever you are conducting a research where you have problem related to the philosophy, you cannot have a hypothesis. If you are not conducting a philosophical research, if you are conducting a historical research, now in historical research also, you know the maximum information which you will collect, it will be always qualitative in nature. You will have some quantitative numbers. So therefore, you cannot have the hypothesis whenever you are conducting any historical type of research. But if you are conducting a survey type of research, now in the survey research, there are three. Number one is, it is called exploratory survey. Okay, and when it is an exploratory survey, you know, in exploratory survey, you cannot have a hypothesis because the data which you will have will be qualitative in nature. The geology people, they do exploratory survey. The ONGC people, they do exploratory survey. Then another is the descriptive survey. Now, whenever you want to describe anything, then you cannot have the hypothesis because majority information will be qualitative in nature. Like when you have many of the researches where you want to study the ethnography, you use ethnography, and when you are conducting the research, it is purely a descriptive type of a research. Another is the correlational. So correlational survey. Now you know the word correlation is a technical word and it is a statistical word. Another word is association. Association and correlation, both are technical words, both are statistical technical words. And the general word is a relationship. So in fact, it should have been relationship survey, but it has entered into the books as correlational survey. So you will have the correlational survey. And in correlational survey, you will have the quantitative information. And when you have the quantitative information, then you can have the hypothesis. So in correlational survey, you will have a hypothesis. In exploratory survey, you cannot have hypothesis. So no hypothesis. Okay, and no hypothesis you will be having as far as the descriptive is concerned. But as far as correlation is concerned, you will have the hypothesis. There will be hypothesis. So there will be hypothesis in the correlational survey. Now there is another type of research, and that type of research, you know, is experimental research. And whenever you are doing an experimental research, there has to be a hypothesis. So you have to have the hypothesis. So instead of will, I will say there is a hypothesis. And here also I can say there is a hypothesis. So, okay, so in correlational survey and experimental researches, you must have hypothesis. It is essential because you will have the quantitative data, and when you are having the quantitative data, then you can analyze them with the help of the statistical method, and therefore you can test your hypothesis. Now, another is action research. I'm sure some of you might have read about the action research, and all of you know the action research is experimental in nature. What is the difference between experimental research and action research? The findings of the experimental research can be used for journalization. I repeat, the findings of the experimental research can be used to journalize the findings, but the findings from the action research cannot be used to journalize the findings because they are very, very, very specific. Suppose you are doing a research in your own class where you are teaching. And why are you doing? Because there is some problem which the students are facing, maybe in understanding some information. So you are now using another method in order to teach so that the student understands it. Now, what you are doing, you will do the action research. Whatever you have done may not be useful may not be useful in somebody else's class, because the two teachers are not alike. They differ in respect of many, many, many characteristics. So that's what experimental research. So in experimental research, you must have hypothesis. And in action research also, you can have a hypothesis. I'm saying can have a hypothesis. But in correlational survey and experimental research, you must have the hypothesis. So therefore, I have given you the definition of hypothesis, and I have told you that for which type of researches you can have the hypothesis. Okay, now please understand, whenever you have to conduct a research, you have to select a variable, minimum one variable. And I'm sure you know that the variable, what is a variable? A characteristics that can change, changeable characteristics. Changeable characteristics are called variables. Height is a variable because it changes. Weight is a variable because it changes. Reasoning is a variable because it changes. The cost of apple is a variable because it changes. The speed of car is a variable because it changes. Hemoglobin is a variable. Stress is a variable. Anxiety is a variable. Personality is a variable. Like this, achievement in economics is a variable. Achievement in education is a variable. Achievement in mathematics, and so on. There are so many variables. And these variables are basically of two types. One is called continuous variable. Okay, and another is called discontinuous variable, or you can say discrete variable. Now, these are the two types of variables everywhere, whether you are doing research in English or doing research in Bengali or doing research in French, in German, in history, in geography, in mathematics, in sociology, in education, psychology, management, whatever are the subjects, there are variables which can be classified as continuous variable and discrete variable. Please understand, because there is a misnomer that, and what is that misnomer? Just now I will tell you. And it is because of that the quality of the research is coming down. So in all subjects, you will find continuous variable, you will find discontinuous variable. Now gender is a discontinuous variable. The blood group is a discontinuous variable. RBC is a discontinuous variable. The pages in the books is a discontinuous variable. The subject is a discontinuous variable. Language is a discontinuous variable. Methods of teaching is a discontinuous. There are plenty of discontinuous variables. And the continuous variables are your weight is a continuous variable, height is a continuous variable, reasoning is a continuous variable. Why? Because in these you can have the reading in whole number as well as in fraction. But in case of discontinuous, you only have whole number. How many books in the library? So the librarian say we have 16,05,026 books. The librarian will never say 15,04,306.15 books. They can never say. If you say how many subjects you are studying, you will say I'm studying 4 subjects, 3 subjects, 1 you can't say 1.5 subjects. So the discontinuous variable means the variable is always expressed in the whole number. And whenever you are expressing the variable in whole number as well as fraction, then it is called a continuous variable. And these variables will be in each and every subject irrespective of, no problem. Then there is another way that you can classify your variable. And these will be specifically only in experimental study. If you have an experimental study, then you can use the word like independent variable, or you can also have say treatment. And another variable is called the dependent variable. Okay, so these, you know, when the teacher is teaching with the help of a new method, say right now in COVID-19, the people started teaching online. It is the students were never taught online before. Now, when the teacher was teaching online, now online teaching is an independent variable, and the understanding of the student is a dependent variable. And you must have read in the newspaper that to start with, many schools as well as college and the universities, they were having online classes for 5 hours, for 6 hours, for long hours. But when the government came to know and they were told that this is not correct, the student should not be taught for a longer hours online. So therefore the government, they told to the institutes that you should not have more than 1 hour or 2 hours a day. Now, why this change? Because of various other aspects that student cannot concentrate for 5 hours. For students, it is difficult to sit for 5 hours and to listen to the teachers. Okay, when you are in the real classroom, the face-to-face teaching is very different, because the teacher can see you, the teacher can ask you question, you can see the teacher, but teacher cannot see all of you. So understand, so therefore the method of teaching becomes a treatment, and dependent variable can be your understanding or can be your achievement. But do you think your achievement depends entirely on the treatment? No, there are some intervening variable. And these intervening variable may be intrinsic, or extrinsic. Intrinsic means they are inside the process. Extrinsic means they are outside the process. When right now you are listening to me, the room in which you are sitting or the place where you are sitting, if people are talking, then you get disturbed. So that people talking is an intervening variable, and it is outside because it's not with you, it is outside. But if you are listening to me and if you get a headache, then your concentration will decrease. Now here is an intervening variable, it is inside the process. So intervening variable may be inside the process or maybe outside the process. Now your independent variable is always a discontinuous variable. Your dependent variable is always a continuous variable. Your intervening variable may be continuous or may be discontinuous. So understand, so continuous and discontinuous are the variables which are everywhere. But independent variable, dependent variable, and intervening variable, mostly you use these words in experimental study. In survey also you can have intervening variable. But in experimental study, there will be large number of intervening variables. And as a researcher, you have to control them. I'm not talking about now the different methods of control, but I'm only trying to bring is that as a researcher, you have to have a variable. And when you have a variable, then there has to be sources of variable. What are the different sources of variable? From where will you get these variables? One of the source is called review of related literature. Please understand, in many of the theses, people write review of literature, which is technically incorrect. So therefore, the correct word is review of related literature. Why related? Because if you are doing research in economics, it must be related to the aspect of economics which you want to study. If you are doing research in education, so whatever the aspect related to education you are working on, your literature must be related to that. And what is the meaning of the literature? Literature, you know, journals, e-journals, Shodh Ganga, dissertation, abstract, international thesis. And those people who belong to education, they know there are surveys of research in education. First survey of research in education, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. These are the different surveys available, and where you can find all researches conducted in India related to different aspects of education. Their abstracts are available, and based on the abstract, the trend report is available. So that is the meaning of a literature, and it has to be related, and you have to review it. So this is the one source which will help you right from your first step, and the same will help you in formulating the hypothesis. So this is the source of variable, and this will be your base of formulating the hypothesis. Another source of the variable is the theory. And this will be the unutilized or underutilized. It is unutilized or underutilized theories. Now, these are two important sources of problem, and these two will become the basis of formulating the hypothesis. How will they become the basis of formulating the hypothesis? Just now I will tell you. So therefore, the basis of formulating the hypothesis is, okay, let me. All right, I'll say review of related literature, and another is unutilized theory. There are many other sources of problem, but I'm not considering that. I'm considering these because these will become the basis of formulating the hypothesis. So I will be telling you the basis. Basis of formulating hypothesis. Okay. And before I come to the basis of formulating the hypothesis, I will now like you to understand two things. Number one is the types of hypothesis. It is types of hypothesis. What are the types of hypothesis? I'm sure you might have studied. There are, in fact, three types of hypothesis. One is called research hypothesis. And another one is called the statistical hypothesis. And another is called operational hypothesis. I do not know how many of you know these three types of hypothesis. And it is your choice whether you want to formulate a research hypothesis, or you want to formulate a statistical hypothesis, or you want to formulate an operational hypothesis. Absolutely your choice. You need not to ask anyone, and there are no basis of deciding the types of hypothesis. And dear friends, it is always the statistical hypothesis that can be tested with the help of the statistical technique. The statistical technique cannot test directly the research hypothesis. But statistical hypothesis and operational hypothesis can be tested directly with the help of statistical hypothesis, because operational hypothesis is a little extension of statistical hypothesis. I will give you example right now. Don't bother about it. It's very easy. It's not difficult. So these are the types of hypothesis. And as a researcher, it is your choice. Another thing is it's not a types of hypothesis. Now it is forms of hypothesis. And dear friends, there are two forms. One is called null form. And this null form is denoted by H0. Okay. It is always denoted by H0. This is the null form. And another is called directional form, or it is called alternative form. And this directional form or alternative form is represented by H1. So please understand which form should be of your hypothesis. You cannot decide yourself. For deciding the forms, you must have the base. And so therefore, there are bases of formulation of hypothesis. I hope you have understood. As far as the types of hypothesis is concerned, it is your choice. You can formulate any type of hypothesis. But when it comes to the forms of the hypothesis, you cannot formulate at your own. There must be basis. And now I'm telling you the basis of formulating hypothesis. And there are two bases of formulating hypothesis. One, just now I referred, review of related literature. Now, how this review of related literature will help you? See, when you read the related literature, it is possible that you may come to know that no research has been conducted. No research has been conducted. Suppose you know that the artificial intelligence is being used for teaching purposes. There is one institute in Bangalore. It is a school, international school. They have an artificial intelligence teacher. And this particular teacher is teaching to class 7th, 8th, and 9th. All subjects. Please understand, all subjects. They have their teachers. Their teacher, they go to the class just once a week. Otherwise, rest of the day, the students are being taught by artificial intelligence teacher. Now, right at the moment, we do not have any research. Okay. And since we do not have any research, and you may like to conduct a research, And if you want to conduct a research, it will be experimental in nature, and then you have to have a hypothesis. Now, which form of the hypothesis should you have? I'm sure you will say that if this is the situation, then you have to have the null form of the hypothesis. Why null form? Because you don't have any base, you don't have any evidence. And whenever there are no strong evidences, it is always the null form. Okay? So therefore, when you read the related literature, and that is why review of the related literature is very, very important. It starts helping you from step number 1, and it will help you in step number 2. Therefore, review of related literature cannot be an independent step. Some of the people, they say that review of related literature is an independent step of research. It is not, it cannot be the independent step of the research, because it will help the researcher in step number 1, in step number 2, in step number 3, etc., etc. So any step which becomes part and parcel of the other steps cannot be an independent step in itself. So whenever you have a related literature, and when you are reviewing it and you find no research has been conducted, then you have to formulate the hypothesis in the null form. You cannot formulate hypothesis in any other form. Okay? Now, if you find that researches have been conducted, then again you have two options. One option is a few researches have been conducted. Now, if a few researches have been conducted, then can you tell me which form of the hypothesis you should use? I'm sure you will again say that the hypothesis must be again in the null form, because you do not have a strong evidence. Because on the basis of few researches, it is not possible to give the direction. So you have the direction only and only if your base is very strong. So a few researches, if you have, again, you have to form the hypothesis in the null form. And the third situation is that large number of researches have been conducted. And if large number of researches have been conducted, then again, there will be two situations. Number 1, there may be a consistency in findings. I repeat, if large number of researches have been conducted, and if there is consistency in the findings, then there is no need of conducting the same type of research again. Because if you conduct the same type of research again, you will get the same finding. So there is no need of conducting the more researches if you have the consistency in the finding. Then you can now theorize, or you can give laws. You see what Newton did. Newton, after he saw the apple coming down, then it stuck to him that why the apple came down. So he threw many objects up, and whatever the objects he threw, all objects came down. So there was a consistency in the observation. And on the basis of that, he gave laws. And that's what is known as Newton's laws of motion. Okay, so like this. But if suppose you have a large number of researches, large number of researches, and there is inconsistency in finding. Inconsistencies in findings. Then what do? Now, if there are inconsistencies in findings, then how will you use this to decide whether the hypothesis should be formulated in the null form or should it be formulated in the directional form? Now here I'm just considering, suppose approximately, let us say that 10,000 researches have been conducted where they have compared the stress of males with stress of female. Okay, suppose 10,000 researches have been conducted. And if 10,000 researches have been conducted, there are 10,000 findings related to the comparison of stress of males and females. Now, it is possible that you might have, when you analyze the findings, you might have come to know that 80% of the researches, 80% of the findings indicate that the mean score of stress of male, mean score of stress of male, okay, suppose is greater than the mean stress. I have not written score because of space. So if it is that mean score of stress, okay, let us forget. Mean score of stress, if I want to write, okay. Okay, this is of females. So if mean score of stress of male is greater than the mean score of stress of female, and suppose the 15% of the researches, if suppose they say that if 15% of the researches findings indicate 50% of findings, okay, 50% of findings indicate that the mean score of stress of male is significantly lower than the mean score of stress of female. And if suppose I have something like this, that if suppose it is 5% of the findings of the researchers indicate that the mean score of stress of male is equal to the mean score of stress of female. Now, if you have the 80% researchers say that mean score of stress of male is greater than the mean score of stress of female, 15% indicate that mean score of stress of males is significantly lower than that of females, and 5% indicate that mean score of stress of males is equal to the mean score of stress of female. If this is the situation, then can you decide that which should be the form? I'm sure you will say it must be in the directional form. Why directional form? Because it is in the directional form. Why? Because 80% of the researchers, they are pointing towards a particular direction. And the direction is that the mean score of stress of male is significantly higher than that of females. That's what should be your hypothesis on the basis of this. But if suppose I'm taking another situation and I'm just copying and here. Suppose my 40% of the findings, they indicate, now I'm taking another case. Suppose 40% of the findings indicate that mean score of stress of males is significantly higher than the mean score of stress of the female. And 45% of the researches, if they indicate that the mean score of stress of male is smaller than the mean score of stress of female. Okay, and suppose the 15% of the findings indicate that mean score of stress of males is equal to the mean score of stress of female. Now, if this is the situation, now can you tell me, can I give the direction? Is it possible as a researcher, can I give the direction? Because some of you might be thinking that because 45% is more than 40%, but understand the difference between 40% and 45% is not large enough. So if this is the situation, you have to formulate hypothesis in the null form. So I hope you have understood it, that if you want to use review of related literature, okay, and if you find no research has been conducted, then you have to formulate hypothesis in the null form. Whether you want a research hypothesis, statistical hypothesis, or operational hypothesis, it doesn't matter. But the form has to be the null. If this situation does not happen, if you come across a few researches have been conducted, not large in number, a few, then again you cannot give a direction. it has to be again the null form. So when no research has been conducted or a few researches have been conducted, then hypothesis must be formulated in the null form. Whether you formulate a research hypothesis or a statistical or operational, it does not make a difference. But it has to be in the null form. But if large number of researches have been conducted, please see, this is important. Then you should further analyze the findings. And if you find that 80% of the research findings, they indicate that mean score of stress of male is significantly higher than the mean score of stress of female, and 15% indicate that mean score of stress of male is significantly lower than the mean score of stress of female, and if 5% indicate that mean score of stress of male is equal to the mean score of stress of female. Now, in this particular situation, because majority of the researches, they are pointing a direction. So if this situation happens, then you should formulate the hypothesis in the directional form. So you will formulate the hypothesis in the directional form, provided you have a strong evidence. I proceed further. I'm repeating this point because it's slightly difficult. Now, suppose another researcher finds that 40% of the research findings, they indicate that mean score of stress of males significantly higher than the mean score of stress of female. And 45% of the research findings indicate that mean score of stress of males is significantly lower than the mean score of stress of female, and 15% they indicate that the mean score of stress of male is equal to the mean score of stress of female. Now, if such a situation is there, then you know you do not have a strong base to give the direction. So you have to formulate the hypothesis in the null form. And dear friend, this is the reason that why majority of the researchers, they formulate hypothesis in the null form, because they do not have the strong base. Understand, it is not the sweet will of the researcher. It is not the sweet will of the guide. No, you have to have the base, and base must be strong base. So therefore, when you are referring, you are taking review of related literature as a base to formulate your hypothesis. Then if these situations occur, so you can take the decision yourself, absolutely no problem. Now, next is the theory. If you have theory as a base, then can you tell me, should you formulate hypothesis in the null form, or should you formulate hypothesis in the directional form? When theory is there, if theory is the base, then as a researcher, you cannot formulate hypothesis in the null form. You have to formulate hypothesis in the directional form. Why directional form? Because you have a strong evidence. You have a strong base. And since you have a strong base, so you can formulate the hypothesis in the directional form. So there are two bases of formulating the hypothesis. Number one base is review of related literature. And on the basis of the review of related literature, you can decide whether you should formulate hypothesis in the null form or you should formulate hypothesis in the directional form. The second base is the theory, and any research is based on any theory. Whatever the theory in your field you are using it, then in that particular case, you have to only form hypothesis in the directional form. You cannot formulate hypothesis in the null form. So I close this particular point by saying that for formulating the hypothesis in the null or the directional form, you have to have a base. But to decide the types of hypothesis, it is the goodwill, the personal choice of the researchers. So now I come to the next point, is the types of hypothesis. So dear friend, I will take one objective and then I will write the different types of hypothesis in front of you, and then you can understand that how these different types of hypothesis, the wordings will differ. This is important. And let me tell you, not many of the guides or many of the teachers, those who are teaching the research methodology, they teach these things, and which is very, very, very important. So now I am going to the types of hypothesis. And I am giving the types. Okay. Now, for the types of hypothesis, let us take objective. Suppose I'm taking one objective, and you know objective must be such so that I have some statistics in it. So if I say to compare mean scores of reasoning of male and female students. If this is my objective, then how I will word my hypothesis? You remember that wording of the hypothesis, I asked you, you have to take the decision which tense. Now, can you tell me which tense we have to use here? Just think about it. The tense which you have to use will be the present tense. You cannot formulate your hypothesis in the future tense. You cannot formulate hypothesis in the past. It has to be the present tense. Why? Because there are bases. Whenever there are bases, the hypothesis must be formulated in the present tense. So when you are expressing it, it has to be in the present tense. This is number one. Number two, when you are wording the hypothesis, you have to use the word significant. Understand, if in the morning, if you take your weight before taking food, your breakfast, then you take your breakfast, and after that again you take your weight. Do you find the difference in the weight is large enough? You will say no. So that means this change in the weight is not a significant one. It might have been because of something else. So we have to write the hypothesis in the present tense, and we have to use the word significant. Now I am writing the hypothesis. So please understand that. Now, first I'm writing the research hypothesis. Now, the research hypothesis will be there is no significant. Now see, you know the third definition of the hypothesis? The third definition was hypothesis is the conjectural statement about the relationship between variables. So I have to use the word relationship or any word which is not a statistical word. Relationship is not a statistical word. Influence is not a statistical word. Effect is not a statistical word. So I can use these words when I'm trying to define or formulate the research hypothesis. So there is no significant there is no significant relationship between reasoning and gender of students. Now this is the hypothesis which I have written, and this is the wording of the hypothesis, and it is called a research hypothesis. Because I have used the word relationship, and this relationship is not a statistical word, it is a general word. Now I write the statistical hypothesis. Now when I'm formulating the statistical hypothesis, I must use the statistical word, and therefore it is there is no significant difference in mean scores of reasoning of male and female students. Now please understand, here I have used the word mean. And since I have used the word mean, so this becomes a statistical hypothesis. Now you see the difference in the wording of the two hypotheses. This is the research hypothesis, that there is no significant relationship. And here I am saying there is no significant difference in mean scores of reasoning of male and female students. Now, if I have to write the operational hypothesis, which I am sure your teachers might have told you or might not have told you. So therefore, let me see what is that operational hypothesis. When I'm writing the operational hypothesis, I'm just copying the statistical hypothesis and write here. Now, this portion of statistical hypothesis and operational hypothesis are identical, but it differs. After this, I have to write here the tool which the researcher will be using for assessing the reasoning. I repeat, here the researcher has to get the data of the reasoning because he has to calculate mean, and reasoning is a continuous variable. So therefore, he has to have a tool to assess the reasoning. So when I am saying operational hypothesis, the operational hypothesis has got additional information which statistical hypothesis does not have. And what is that additional information? It is which tool the researcher will be using, that will be mentioned here. So here say when reasoning is assessed with the help of Raven's progressive standard progressive matrices. Now just see, when I am writing this one, Raven's standard progressive matrices, this is the name of the tool which I am using for assessing the reasoning. So when you are writing the operational hypothesis, in the operational hypothesis, you have to mention the tool which you will be using. But when you are formulating the statistical hypothesis, you need not to mention the tool. And as a researcher, when you are writing your proposal, you might not have done a lot of review and things of that variety. So you might be knowing, or you may not be able to decide which tool you will be using. And if you are unable to decide the tool, then you cannot formulate the operational hypothesis. So operational hypothesis is to be formulated in those researches where the researcher is sure about the tool which he or she wants to use it. So you see the difference amongst the research hypothesis. If you want, I can keep all of them on one page. So you can see the difference. This is the research hypothesis, this is the statistical hypothesis, and this is the operational hypothesis. Now I want to ask the organizer, can I take 10 minutes or I cannot take 10 minutes more?
Sir, you may take, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'm taking the 10 minutes more.
Right, sir. Right, sir.
All right. So this is the one example that I took the objective. This was the objective taken. And for this particular objective, I have already formulated the hypothesis. So you have seen these are the type of the hypothesis which I have formulated. Let me take one more example. I take another objective. And the objective which I am now taking is to study the correlation between stress and achievement in mathematics of students. Now suppose this is my objective. Okay, now here I have written the word correlation, and it is really a statistical word. All of you know this thing. So if I have to write my research hypothesis, then how do I write my research hypothesis? My research hypothesis is there is no, please see, I am using or writing the hypothesis in the null form. But if you have a strong base, you can formulate the hypothesis in the directional form, no problem. So there is no significant relationship between, there's no significant relationship between the stress and achievement in mathematics of student. So this is the research hypothesis. And if I want to the statistical hypothesis, then my statistical hypothesis is very simple. I can just copy this one and I just write. So my statistical hypothesis will be, I say like this. There is no significant correlation between stress and achievement in mathematics of student. Now, because I have written the word correlation, so it becomes a statistical hypothesis. Now, if I want to write operational hypothesis, then I can write it something like this. I can copy this. Okay, and then I say when there are two variables here, one is the stress, other is achievement in mathematics. So when stress is, I am writing here present tense. Okay, stress is assessed with the help of stress scale by stress scale by Bobby, and achievement in mathematics and achievement in, I need not to say again assessed, I have said achievement in mathematics by achievement in mathematics test with the help of and achievement in mathematics by achievement in mathematics test of RAM. Okay, so or of even teachers, I can say that, and mathematics and achievement in mathematics, I have to write, I think, to make it achievement in mathematics is assessed with the help of this. You can change also, no problem, with the help of achievement in mathematics test by the teacher. Now, this is how you have a objective, and then for that particular objective, you can decide whether you want to write hypothesis in the null form or directional. For that, you have a base. But which type of hypothesis you want to write, it is your choice. But for one objective, only one type of hypothesis must be given. So for one objective, only one type of hypothesis should be formulated. You cannot formulate for one objective, the two types of hypothesis. No, only one type of hypothesis, and that is your choice, whether you want to have a research hypothesis or statistical hypothesis or operational hypothesis. So I stop it here. Any question you want to ask, please go ahead and give me a feedback whether this way should I proceed tomorrow or should I have my PPT. I like to have your opinion about it. So over to the organizers. Over to the organizers. Over to you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
If there are questions, then you can ask. If no question,
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Bobby, ma'am. Dr. Bobby, ma'am.
Sir, is it mandatory to convert research hypothesis to statistical hypothesis?
No,
if we use statistical tests like SPSS?
Tomorrow, when I am giving you the testing of the hypothesis, I will take a research hypothesis and then I will tell you how it has to be tested. So for testing, you need not to really convert it into the statistical one, but your statistical technique can test directly the statistical hypothesis. So first the statistical hypothesis has to be tested, and on the basis of that, the research hypothesis will be tested. This I will do it tomorrow. Don't worry about it. Next question.
Is it necessary to create null hypothesis as negative statement?
My dear friend, there is nothing like negative and there is nothing like positive. This is number one. And number two, when we are formulating hypothesis in the null form or directional form, it is not the sweet will of the researcher. You have to go as per your base. Whatever your related literature analysis indicates, tells you, you have to have that form. Okay, and that is why as a researcher, you have to keep on collecting the related literature, and then you have to keep on analyzing the related literature. Without analyzing related literature, or if you have a theory without understanding the theory, you will not be able to decide whether you should have hypothesis in the null form or the directional form. So it's not your sweet will. That's
Shivashakti madam. Shivashakti madam.
Bobby ma'am is there, ma'am. Bobby.
Sajjan sir மாத்தி விடுங்களே panelist அவர் ஏதோ question கேட்டிருக்காங்க.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
Any other question? If there is a question, you tell me. Otherwise, bye.
Yes. No, it was really a wonderful presentation. My network got just disconnected. Just
SAJAN.
Ma'am.
JAN. SAJAN. Dr. K.S. Sajjan.
Yes.
Participants, please, any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask.
Sajjan sir, you can clarify your doubt, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Sajjan sir.
Hello.
Yes, Sajjan sir.
Hello.
Yes, please. If you want to ask question, you can ask directly to me, no problem.
Okay, sir. I'm Dr. Watson.
Ask. Go
Sir.
ahead.
Okay. One of the types of hypothesis, you said that this is optional in writing the research paper. So we know, as all our colleagues know, that hypothesis is an expected answer to research question.
Correct.
So how can we expect answers to research questions without having hypothesis?
Please understand, hypothesis has to be tested. You know, testing of hypothesis is very, very important. And when you have a qualitative information, in qualitative information, you cannot analyze the data with the help of a statistical technique, and you cannot test the hypothesis. So whenever you have the qualitative data, hypothesis can never be. And who says hypothesis has to be there in each and every research? It is wrong. You cannot have in philosophical research, in historical research, in languages. You cannot. So if somebody has told you, so maybe you once again see and understand it. Next question.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I have one doubt, sir. In your example, you suggest that out of 10,000 literature, almost equal percentage of males have superior than females and equal percentage of females than males. Then again, our hypothesis says that there is no difference. Can we state it as we expect there is a difference?
No, no, no. Please, there is nothing like expect. You are not expecting anything.
Sir, hypothesis is actually a tentative.
Tentative solution.
Yeah.
It is not expectation, sir. It is tentative solution.
Yeah. Then why we use that tentative solution as there is no difference, even though we have adequate evidence that there is a difference?
No, because in 40 and 45, this difference just might be because of some errors. This difference is not a vast difference.
Okay.
And if it is a vast difference, and if you really feel that this 5% difference is really a very big difference, you can. But I'm sure no one will agree to that.
Okay, that means we have to consider both males and females are equal. The study maybe have some errors regarding these 500 studies may have some errors.
Yes. And see, this I have taken just an example to illustrate.
Okay, yeah, that's okay, sir.
Might be more in number, or researches might be less in number. I don't know.
Okay, right, sir.
Go ahead. Next question.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes. Can I speak?
Go ahead.
I am Hemlata Talesra. Good afternoon, Professor Samsaniwal.
Good afternoon, madam.
Your lecture was very good, excellent, and cover all the aspects of hypothesis. I have one question.
Go ahead.
When we evaluated a PhD thesis or MA research,
okay,
some researchers write only 2 or 5 hypotheses.
Correct.
The other write 20, more than 20, 15 hypotheses. I think the more number are not valuable. What is your opinion in this regard, sir?
Yes, I tell you my opinion, madam.
Yeah.
Hemlata, madam.
Yeah.
I have seen a PhD person.
Yeah.
Who had 50 objectives, and person had 50 hypotheses. No harm.
But too much.
See, there is
this is only enlarge the pages.
No, please understand. There is nothing like large and there is nothing like small. If you have objectives and you have decided that I want to study so many aspects, and when you want to study large number of aspects, your objective will be large in number. And when you have large in number, then you have to decide for each and every objective, if you have a quantitative data, then you have to have a hypothesis. Tomorrow, I will give you some wording of the hypothesis, wording of the objective. I don't, when you use two-way ANOVA, three-way ANOVA, two-way ANCOVA, three-way ANCOVA, then number of hypotheses will increase.
Yeah.
You can have the, I don't think there is any say mistake in having large number of hypotheses if you have large number of objectives. No problem. I think you can have no problem. Only the thing is you have to see whether the wording is okay, because many people word it in the future tense. That's technically, and you have to see whether they are writing the word significant or not. You know, things like this. That is what is more important.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any other question, Bobby?
Is there any other question, participant? Sir, it was really a wonderful session, sir. I really enjoyed.
But do you think that I do tomorrow the same, or should I come with PPT?
Sir, whichever. This is also very nice, sir. Whichever, sir. You have always been a dynamic person, sir. Like,
what is the opinion of the participant?
Participants, if they don't have any other questions, we can move on. Shiva Shakti, madam?
Ma'am.
I think we should move on.
Yeah, move on. Yes.
All right. I would like to thank Sir Sansawal sir, for giving such a brilliant talk. His way of delivery was really unique. In fact, sir had always been a unique person. Since the day I met him, I found him to be such unique person. Like he is no, he's no ordinary person. There's so much things to learn, and he's not just depending on books. He has stated all basing on his experience. So I really thank you, sir, for being with us, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
We will meet again tomorrow, sir.
Okay, tomorrow I will log in 5 minutes to 12.
Right, sir.
Dr. Ken Brin joined.
Yes. Okay, sir. Thank you so much. God bless you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, doctor. Thank you so much.
I'm leaving now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Madam Hemlata?
Dr. Ken Brin joined.
Yes. Madam Hemlata, madam?
Yeah.
Sir, Dr. Ken Brin, sir, has joined us.
Yes, already joined.
Yes, I think they will
tell him to unmute.
Yes.
He's in mute. Yeah.
Yes. I will ask him to unmute. Yes.
He's here.
Ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
For introducing sir, there is a better person like you, ma'am. So I would
Sure. Now I
sir.
introduce or after some time?
No, you may introduce him, sir.
Okay. Can I start?
Yes, ma'am. Please, ma'am.
Okay.
Firstly, Cambridge. Hello, sir. Cambridge, sir.
Oh, he's here.
Hello.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Good morning to Dr. Ken, Dr.
Welcome
Bobby, and the organizers. So I am introducing Dr. Ken. Dr. Ken is past president of Commonwealth Council of Educational Administration and Management, that is CCEAM, from 2014 to 2018. Served as vice president of CCEAM from 2013 to 2014. In Canadian Association for the Study of Educational Administration, he served as a vice president, president, and past president. Presently, Dr. Ken is working as associate professor, Faculty of Education, University of New Brunswick, Canada. A versatile personality, Dr. Ken supervising of about 100 course-based MEd and PhD students in educational administration and leadership each year. Guiding PhD students and MEd thesis of root students, he has been examined a number of doctoral dissertations and MEd thesis as external examiner. He is an expert in educational law policy, governance, professional learning, communities, role of policies, governance, principals and vice principals, parental involvement in education and distance education. He is also teaching different nature of subjects. These are cultural context of education, administrative theory, legal aspect of education, educational theory and school administration, politics and policy in education administration, and secondary school administration. Dr. Kane has been working as a reviewer of several years, grant applications, reviewer of several years, grant applications, university programs, and conferences proposals. He is book on review editor for leadership and policy in schools. He is in the community of member of Ontario Teacher Certification since 1983. Dr. Kane has been several publications on education, transforming schools, educational administration, promoting organizational and cultural change in the form of papers published in national and international journals. Dr. Kane reviewed a book on a decade research in school principal. Still today, Dr. Kane is very active in education, educational administration and leadership through CCEAM and University of New Brunswick. Thank you very much for giving me this chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemlata madam. Actually, sir's session was from 3, but then thank you so much, sir. We apologize for this instant time change. It is early morning there. It is, I think, 5 a.m. morning. So thank you so much for the cooperation, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome.
A very good morning, sir.
Good morning.
From India. So, right, sir. So we hand over to you, sir. Kindly please.
Okay.
I'm just waiting. So I can start.
I'm just waiting for my 2 colleagues to join as well.
Yeah. Okay, sir.
I don't know if, I believe Tiffany Vasson is on. If she could indicate, that would be good. Okay, Tiffany is on. Do you have your camera on, Tiffany? You can just, that way people can see you.
Yeah.
Okay. And my other colleague is Nancy Matthews. I don't know if she has joined yet. Okay, I see that you have my slides on the screen. Is somebody there going to advance them as we go along, or do you want me to do that?
What do you say, Shiva Shakti madam? What's your opinion? Should we go on?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Right, sir.
Ma'am, do you visible the screen?
Yes, you just do F5 function key, F5. The whole slide will come. F5. For me, it is visible because I'm using laptop.
Yeah, yes. It is visible.
It's very clear. It's very clear.
Okay, ma'am. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gaim, I welcome you, sir. Very good morning.
Good morning.
Very good morning.
I'm just waiting for my other colleague to join us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
You have done with your breakfast? Breakfast?
No, I'll do it. I'll eat breakfast after this.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, we're sorry, sir.
That's okay. Is it better if I advance the slides, or do I just indicate to whoever is speaking, whoever's running the slides, to do that?
The slides will be shown from Shiva Shakti madam.
Okay.
Sir, now you are a host. Please share the screen, sir.
Okay. Just a minute.
You will try, yes, sir.
Okay, so can start the slides.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give status to Tiffany Basson?
I stopped the share.
Shiva Shakti madam?
Yes, yes.
Like one thing very great, sir has arranged his own scholars who will also be participating here.
Oh.
So they will be sharing their views also. So
thank you.
It's really.
Okay. Can you admit my 2 students to the seminar?
Sir?
Can you admit my 2 scholars to the seminar? Do you need their email addresses?
Dr. Bobby, ma'am?
Yes. The email ID, sir, you can use my email, sir. And Shiva Shakti madam, you have made sir co-host, right?
Yes. Sir is host now.
So sir can include. Sir can include.
Yes.
Isn't it so? Right. So you may include your scholars.
Yeah, I see that Tiffany has written a note as well in the chat. She just needs to be admitted.
Sir, visible now.
Okay, yep, I see my slides are visible.
Yes, voice is audible.
Okay. I'm just waiting to see if my 2 colleagues are available too.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Please.
I think, I think Tiffany wrote a note on the chat window asking to be given presenter status.
Excuse me, sir, Dr. Ken, is it Sunday morning, 5 in the morning, or Monday there in your place?
It is Sunday morning at 6 a.m.
Okay, great, great, great.
I think Wasif sir is also there. Wasif
Yes,
sir.
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Wasap. there.
Yes.
Now it is 12 o'clock p.m. in Jordan. At 12 p.m.
Oh. Okay.
So it's great. Here 5 o'clock, there say 6 o'clock, night time, morning time. Great. You are great. Organizers are very great.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, I believe that Nancy and Tiffany are both here. I saw a phone number. Can you see them on your list, Bobby? The Tiffany Baston and Nancy Matthews.
Okay, I'm checking it, sir. Just
Okay.
hold on.
I don't see that on the screen, but that doesn't mean the same thing.
Sir, could you ask them to just email me the name so that I can just find it out easily, or
Okay.
they can, right?
Okay. Did you hear that, Nancy and Tiffany? Just email to Bobby your name so she can find them. Your name's on the list.
Bobby, madam, you see to the spelling
Yes, yes.
Nancy, N-A-N-C-Y.
Okay,
Nancy,
okay,
you see to the spelling Nancy. Is it?
All
It is
right.
there.
Yes. I'm adding
Nancy
it to.
dot Matthews.
Sir, edit. And even Tiffany Baston, I think, yeah. Just hold on.
So I'm on.
Okay.
Oh, there's
Yes.
Nancy.
Hello,
Hi.
thank you.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, I've added both of them, sir. I've added both of them.
Nancy,
Oh, okay. I see Tiffany too.
good morning, ma'am. Welcome you.
Right.
I welcome
Thank
you.
you.
Welcome to India. Welcome to India.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here at 6 in the morning. It's lovely.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
We're all here.
We're all here.
We're
All right.
here.
All right. Do you want me to start now?
Right.
Okay. Is it Bobby? Do you want me to begin the presentation?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, good day, everyone. As my name is Ken Breen, and my two colleagues are Nancy Matthews and Tiffany Baston. We're going to speak to you about two qualitative research methodologies: case study and grounded theory. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to start by outlining qualitative research features and purposes. And then Nancy's going to speak about grounded theory and in particular describe a study that she just recently completed using grounded theory. And then Tiffany's going to do the same thing for case study, talk about case study and how she used it and why she used it for her study. And then we'll take questions from the presenters or from the audience. So what I like to say about qualitative research or methods in education is that that's actually those are the methodologies that are most commonly used by my colleagues and students in our faculty. Qualitative methods have become very popular in education research among in our faculty. We have students and I have colleagues who do research in all kinds of areas, and qualitative methods are the most popular. I think the reason is that qualitative research is designed for exploring and understanding the meaning that people ascribe to social and human problems. And qualitative research methods are particularly suitable when you have complex, ill-defined, and dynamic and emerging conditions that are frequent in education. So it's not hard to think about education research and the types of things that interest people in education and think, okay, these are things that are complex. For example, you're looking at how students learn. Well, we all know the students learn in a lot of different ways. Or we're looking at, say, policy matters, how to address concerns, issues, tensions. Those are complex. They're ill-defined. It's not clear what exactly are the particular variables that are at play. Also in education, we have a lot of dynamism. Things are changing all the time. And also we have emerging conditions, things that are coming up that weren't as important in the past. So qualitative methods are particularly suitable for those types of problems. Now, qualitative methodologies can use various methods, including interviews, observations, document analysis, reflective journals, and transcript coding. We're going to hear, when you hear from Nancy and Tiffany, they're going to explain to you how the different types of methods they used to collect data and also to analyze data. And so that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to let Nancy start first. Oh, sorry, before I say that, Nancy and Tiffany both did two studies. Nancy's study was on looking at decision-making and the link between decision-making and decision implementation. And then Tiffany used case study to look at the implementation of a provincial initiative to improve literacy instruction. And in both cases, what was really important was for them to understand the experiences and perspectives of the study participants. Okay, now Nancy, it's your turn.
Good, thank you. Hello, and thank you again and for having me share some information on grounded theory. First, I wanted to point out some tenets of grounded theory, and as shared here, for grounded theory does not start with a hypothesis. It focuses on process related to a topic, and data are collected and analyzed both sequentially and simultaneously, and data are constantly compared and to an emergent core theory. Now, I wanted to point out two key points here are constant comparison and theoretical sampling, as you can see underlined there. And as Creswell states, two primary characteristics of this design are constant comparison of data with emerging categories and theoretical sampling of different groups to maximize the similarities and the differences of information. So with that in mind, digging deeper into constant comparison and theoretical sampling, and this is through Glasser and Strauss, as you can see here with constant comparison, the process involves identifying a phenomena, object, event, or setting of interest, identifying a few local concepts, principles, structural or process features of the experience or phenomena of interest, and making decisions regarding initial collection of data based on one's initial understanding of the phenomena. And the key point here is that with grounded theory, further data collection is not planned in advance of analysis and the emergence of theory. Now, engaging in theoretical sampling, as a couple of points here that are shown, it involves identifying what group or subgroup to turn to next to collect data and selecting comparison groups for fostering the development of emergent categories. Now, what should be kept at the forefront here is that subsequent sampling decisions should be purposeful as well as relevant. And that leads to the purpose of grounded theory, and really simply put, to generate a grounded theory that explains some process related to a topic. So that is that the theory is grounded instead of being posed in advance and subjected to hypothesis testing for verification. As well, to keep in mind with grounded theory, and as explained here by Glasser, and what I personally appreciated about grounded theory is that it challenges researchers to avoid predetermined thoughts in order to remain sensitive to the data by being able to record events, to detect happenings without first having them filtered through and squared with pre-existing hypotheses and biases. Further to that, from Shermaz, it does require that the researcher be open-minded and be able to look at data through many lenses, that is entering into the lives and taking into account personal worldviews of the participants. And again, that is something that I appreciated about grounded theory. Now, grounded theory does have a coding process. And again, based on Strauss and Corbin, as well as Creswell here, it is looking at it through open coding axial coding, and selective coding used to identify the emerging patterns, categories, and themes. It is explained as generating categories of information called open coding, then selecting one of the categories and positioning it within a theoretical model called axial coding, and then explicating a story from the interconnection of these categories called selective coding. Now, simply put, going through, if we were to go through that process, it would mean looking at words and phrases. They would emerge and that you would highlight an issue of importance. Those words or phrases would be noted using a short cipher phrase or code, as it's called. And when the same or similar words are mentioned again in the data that you're looking at or described in an issue, that would be noted again. So again, looking at that and going through that process, eventually those codes are analyzed, and all codes that relate to a common theme are grouped together that lead to the emergence of a theory. Now, comparing Strauss and Corbin to Sharmaz, you'll see that it shows a little bit of a graph showing that axial coding is the cornerstone of Strauss and Corbin's approach to grounded theory, whereas Sharmaz considers axial coding as optional. However, as you'll see here in the box, common procedures for them are theoretical sampling, constant comparison, and theoretical saturation, which is important to note. Looking at methods, there are numerous methods, and Ken mentioned a few methods earlier, and there certainly are numerous data collection methods, including interviews, observations, questionnaires, focus groups, case studies, document analysis, and narratives. And I will share a bit about my study next, which will include the methods that I used in picking out the methods from the grounded to get to the grounded theory. So with my study was comparing decision-making and implementation in the education system. And that was very much a passion for me because of being in the education system. And the reason why I chose grounded theory for my study is because first, it allowed me to acknowledge my biases and hypotheses. As you can see here, as it accounts for them only if they emerge in the data extracted from the methods I use. And second, it allowed me to use my voice. And what I appreciated about that, and I guess I realized that during the research process, I must recognize my position, that of being in a position of leadership in education, but that it was looked at as an advantage and only a first step to more meaningful research that was needed. So I did appreciate the fact that it did allow for my voice, and it was also understood the potential influence that I may have on my interpretive process, but that I must ensure that the data was analyzed and represented respectfully and thoughtfully. So I really made sure to do that, and I respected that grounded theory points that out. Also with grounded theory, I appreciated that with the characteristics of constant comparison and theoretical sampling that I mentioned earlier, I appreciate that further data collection is not planned until after the analysis and the emergence of theory from the initial data collection. And also a grounded theory fit with what I was doing because I did have the belief that educational leaders would value the potential of a resulting theory that grounded theory could offer, helping to generate an explanation of the decision-making process as it relates to decision implementation. So the data collection and methods in my study, as you can see here, included participants. I included participants who were formal educational leaders within the New Brunswick Department of Education, as well as one Anglophone school district and various types of schools with grade levels and location and number of students and so on, various types of schools within the district. And as I mentioned earlier, I was also used as a data source. And the methods that I used, and I'll talk a little bit shortly, but the methods with the interviews, I did interviews, individual interviews, 12 of them, and then 2 focus group interviews. I used my personal notes from being in education in the role I was in the roles I had been in education, as well as doing a document analysis of things like the New Brunswick Education Act, the education plans and policies and guidelines, looking at leadership roles, the advertisements, and so on. So the questions to the formal educational leaders began with a focus on 2 decisions that had been previously made in education, and that was integrating information communication and technology, ICT, into education, as well as implementing professional learning communities, both being considered second-order change decisions. So the data produced from that, it produced educational leaders' experiences on decision-making processes within education levels, educational leaders' perspectives, and decision implementation for current and past second-order change decisions, and the relationship between decision-making and decision implementation in the education system. So keeping in mind the tenets of grounded theory with the characteristics of constant comparison and theoretical sampling, and not collecting data until going through and looking to see the emergence of a theory, this slide shows my process with the straight arrow depicting the cycle of data collection and the curved arrow depicting the cycle of coding. So you'll see from that or with the individual interviews, for example, I did, for example, 3 sets of interviews, and then I would do a comparison and then do 2 more. And I continued to do that comparison as I did interviews. So the initial phase in the analysis of data collection was from individual interviews, and then those individual interviews helped with moving to the focus group interviews. Questions were reflective of the patterns formed from the individual interviews to pursue with the focus groups. And the focus group data certainly allowed for deeper understanding of participants' experiences and perspectives on decision making. And of course, through that, as you can see there with notes and documents, a collection of documents were continued to be analyzed as they related to decision making and implementation, and personal notes that were taken as well were analyzed. So through open coding, I constantly compared the individual and focus group interviews and the notes and the documents. And from that, 22 provisional categories emerged. So then going through Axel coding, I reread the data and I looked at the relationship between the categories and got to 10 categories with subcategories. Then continuing with that, looking at the concepts of the categories to make them denser, to get to 5 categories with subcategories. So as you can see here, it went from 22 to 10 to 5 because eventually I started unifying the categories into concepts and themes. And as was mentioned earlier with selective coding, I was explicating a story. So I was at that time, I went back to the participants just to verify with the participants, and I was more directed in questions and deliberate with the participants just to fill in any additional detail or anything that needed further variation or clarification or any final questions. But at that point, no new concepts were developed and no additional data that required changes in conditions or characteristics or consequences of the existing categories. So I did reach the point of theoretical saturation, and the theory emerged truly into a grounded theory, and as was made clear from the grounded theory. So you can see here that 5 core themes emerged. The collaboration and communication, knowledge and skill, strong moral imperative, political and bureaucratic consideration, and balance of autonomy, accountability, and direction. So a grounded theory was produced. And with that grounded theory, as you can see, it was made into a grounded theory with stating that for second order educational change decisions to be implemented at the department, district, or school level, educational leaders must understand political and bureaucratic considerations and have a strong moral imperative. Furthermore, having knowledge and skill, ensuring collaboration and communication, and providing a balance of autonomy, accountability, and direction are crucial. And because of that grounded theory, I did produce practical steps needed. I called antecedent steps to the decision-making process to ensure implementation of decisions. But certainly that information would be for another day. So I will leave it at that with the grounded theory, and I hope that that the information was helpful and when considering grounded theory. Thank you.
Okay, Tiffany, you're up.
Okay, good morning, everyone, or around lunchtime for you folks. So my research was looking at change theory as it related to the implementation of our 10-year education plan. So this would be our strategic plan, and I work at the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. And so this particular study looked at one part of the initiatives within the 10-year education plan. So I had 3 key research questions. I was particularly interested in looking at grade 2 literacy instruction, and those were tied to the implementation of the education plan. And particularly, why are some educators in schools experiencing more student success with the change than others? And what are the barriers? And how do those with different roles in the education system, what supports do they deem the most helpful during this particular change? And also, how do relationships among educators at varied levels impact implementation of the changes required of the 10-year education plan? So why did I choose case study? So what was important for me was to go more in depth with a particular case. So for my research, it was a bounded case, or a case that had particular boundaries with one school district in New Brunswick. So in New Brunswick, we have 7 school districts. 4 of them are English-speaking districts and 3 of them are French-speaking districts. So for my research, I looked at one English-speaking district. I used a variety of data collection methods, as Nancy discussed as well. And this was important in order to triangulate the data. So make sure that I wasn't drawing conclusions from just one source, but I was actually looking across a number of ways to examine information and then determine what were the key ideas or themes coming from that. And another reason why I chose case study was because the work of Flyvberg talks about how critical case study research is to expertise building. So I've been in education for 28 years. And at this point in my career, I really wanted to become an expert in something. So with case study being so in depth and so detailed on a smaller case, you can develop expertise through that. And my questions were predominantly how and why, and therefore Yin would suggest this was a good fit with case study methodology. Some of the challenges or what has been raised before in terms of why case study may be a challenge for looking at the outcomes is there's an apparent inability to generalize from case study. So I know in India, for example, you use a lot of quantitative data and quantitative analysis. And what we want to be sure when we look at a case study is we're not confusing case inference with statistical inference. So for example, I would have interviewed 13 individuals and I would have examined a number of documents and I would have made observations. So the size, the sample size, or the number of people or items that I looked at would be considered small, but that's only if you're looking at that data as equivalent to, say, respondents in a survey. So it's a very different way of gathering data. It's more in depth and bounded. So it's not like comparing how many numbers or how many participants. So that's where sometimes there's a challenge. And what I like about what Stake has to say about case study conclusions is the reader is the central figure in generalizing. So if you were to read my case study, you would naturally start saying, well, that sounds similar to what has been happening in my education system or in my school or my region. So the reader is the central individual to make generalizations or to see where there's commonalities or how the research findings could apply to what you do in your profession. So that's how generalization is addressed in case study. Subjectivity is another question that arises around case study. So how can we ensure that the researcher has a level of subjectivity or they're not using or applying a bias to what they're doing? So just like you do with a quantitative research study, in qualitative research, there is a very structured process. And I will explain the steps that I took around that, as Nancy did. You can see that although the process is different, it is very structured, and that's to ensure that the subjectivity is maintained. I have some colleagues who are researchers as well, and I made sure that along the way when I was doing my research, I would debrief with them. And in a particular case, I actually had another PhD student graduate take my raw data and do analysis to identify key categories and themes. And then I compared what he discovered versus what I had discovered. And I found that we were coming to the same conclusions. So then I knew that I wasn't putting a bias on the data, because compared to my other colleague, he was finding and drawing the same conclusions. So that's part of one of the methods around case study. You want to make sure you're checking with other individuals. The member checking piece, part of doing qualitative research in New Brunswick is that it's critical that we build relationships with the people that are part of our research. So in my case, teachers and principals and people who work across the system were all part of providing the data for this research. And part of member checking is when all of the interviews were transcribed so we could see everything people had said. I shared that back with every person I interviewed and asked them if they were comfortable with what they had said, if they were okay with me sharing what they had said with others and putting it in my dissertation. And it just shows a level of respect and a level of trust in their decision-making, whether they wanted to be part of the research. So all the way through my research, I was always very cognizant of how the relationships with the individuals I was interviewing and working with how that could help me get better data and better information. So when I talked about the data collection methods and I talked about interviews, how they were done is they were semi-structured, which means there were a number of questions that I started out with because I needed to make sure I connected to my overall research questions. But during semi-structured, if you find the person you're interviewing starts to want to talk more about a particular area, you can allow that to happen because you want to see what's important to them and what information comes out of the interview. You don't want to be so rigid that you only stick to the questions that you put at the start. So Miriam talks about that kind of interviewing and how that, again, in case study, this gives a lot of flexibility in what you hear back from others. The rapport and relationship building with the individuals. So you can see my chain across there, the visual from the classroom teacher right up to the delivery leader, which was the person in charge of the whole project. And what I found particularly with classroom teachers and the school principals, I visited their schools twice. One time I spent time just building a relationship with the teachers. I was a teacher for 15 years, so I talked to them a lot about that. And so they built some trust with me. So I was hoping that if they trusted me, I would get more honest feedback about this literacy initiative. With the principals, I wanted to make sure they trusted me as well. And principals, interact a lot with the Department of Education. So I had to make sure with them that they understood I wasn't there as a Department of Education employee, but I was there as a researcher, really wanting to give them voice as to what they felt was important and what they thought about the questions around the literacy initiative. So for observations, I did observations when I visited the schools those 2 times, and also during the interviews, I took some notes, and then directly after the interviews, I added more details about what I observed about their body language, their tone of voice, any surroundings that were happening while we were doing the interviews. And I wanted to make sure it was unobtrusive and direct. For document analysis, there were a number of documents that I looked at. Some were media documents, so things that were in our newspapers, on our radio stations, etc. Looked at our 10-year education plan, some reports that had been written, and our Auditor General for the province of New Brunswick had done an analysis on our education system. So a number of documents were used. So that gets back to the triangulation of data. So I looked at multiple ways to see how this literacy initiative was doing and how people were responding to the change that it required. So the framework that I used to do my data analysis was developed by Richie and Spencer. And all of the information I gathered from the interviews, observations, and documents were put through this process. And again, Srivastava and Thompson talk about why the framework model actually fit my research. And you can see the quote there. Specific questions, limited time frame, all fit with the way that I was doing my research and the fact that I was focusing on a small case during a particular time in the system. So there are stages that were followed during the framework, and I won't read all of the examples or the details, but I'll tell you a little bit about each. So in the familiarization phase, you take all of the information that you gathered and you read through, you make your observations, you create notes, and it's to give you kind of an overall big picture of what was being said. And as I was doing the familiarization stage, I came up with 292 initial impressions. So impressions are just what were some key ideas, things that stuck out to me as I was going through that. After the familiarization and big impressions, then you start to think about a thematic framework. So this is when you look at all of those notes and you start to look at what are the key issues, concepts, or themes. And your framework is a way to start categorizing or moving things into a way that you can start looking for key themes. And when I put the thematic framework in place, I ended up with 68 different categories. And I knew that that would, be a great start, and that I would next start moving the data into those categories. So when you go to indexing and charting, you take everything that you've gathered and you start putting it or fitting it into those categories that are in your framework. And as I did that, I started to realize some of those categories could actually go together. And I collapsed a number of categories into bigger categories, and I ended up with 25 particular categories. And in the last phase of the framework model, you start mapping and interpreting. So now that I had the 25 categories, I started to group those together into emerging themes. And from that, I came up with 5 big themes and 17 sub-themes. So now it was in a much more manageable amount for the reader and for the person with the findings to be able to look at what actually came out of the research. So this visual may be difficult for you to see depending on the screen size that you have, but you can see in each of the 4 phases of my analysis what happened at each. So the first column, you see those 292 impressions, the thematic framework, you synthesize the data. I came up with the categories. I knew they were going to need to synthesize to fewer. Once I took the framework and indexed and charted it, I came to 25. And in the final step, you analyze those categories to develop themes. And the 5 themes are listed in the diagram, but I'm also going to share in the next slide what those themes were. So part of the qualitative process is also being very precise about where your data came from. So for each of the themes, you can see the number of sources that I would have drawn data from to inform this theme, and how many references came from those sources. So the biggest theme that came out of my research was the implementation process and system stability. Over the course of education, particularly in the last 10 years, New Brunswick education has been very unstable. There's been political change. There's been a number of changes in the strategic direction or the plan for the system, and that came out as a big theme. And that's why there were 96 references. Many people talked about this. In the next theme, balanced literacy, which was actually the literacy focus, was discussed, and the change in practice. So there were 16 different sources and 81 references that spoke about this theme. And generally, although people agreed with using balanced literacy in general, the teachers did not feel that it helped them to change their practice. And therefore, they didn't feel that it would lead to the improvement that maybe people who had planned the initiative had hoped it would. The third theme was all about leadership capacity and support, and there were 16 sources and 81 references about this. So what I realized through looking at the data was that principals were absolutely critical. School-based principals were critical in how successful this initiative would be and what support those principals would offer their educators. The fourth theme, defining and strengthening literacy success. I had a particular question, and you could see back at the 3 original research questions. Why are some schools having more success than others, and what are the barriers, and what is literacy success? And I asked people to talk about that. And How educators in New Brunswick define literacy success is that students are making progress, they're demonstrating growth, and not necessarily linking success to how students do on statistics or standardized achievement. So for educators, a key theme was they look at success as how the student grows, not necessarily how students do on big provincial tests. And the final theme was social capital. So in what way do people have resources or other individuals that they can go to for support or to seek knowledge? And that came through with 15 sources and 83 references. And in the next slide, I'll explain the social capital a little bit more. So this visual, if you can see that it's called the misdirected funnel of change implementation. So on the very left side where the funnel is getting narrow, it's getting smaller, that's the point of implementation, and that's where the teacher is, and that's where the students are, and that's where the principal is. And what you can see from this diagram is that the students, the teachers, and the principal actually have the least social capital. So they have the least amount of ability to have resources, to speak to others who are knowledgeable, to reach out and get support when needed. So they're kind of, even though they are the most critical in making educational change, they have the least amount of social capital. And up on the other end is the individuals who are working at, say, the ministry level or the person who is in charge of this initiative. And the challenge with those individuals having more social capital and more decision-making power is that they are very influenced by political leaders. So my point around this is we need to be giving teachers and school principals and those who are actually making educational change more resources and more support, because if we don't give them that, then we're not going to see the change that we want to see in education. So that concludes my overview of my research, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, I put on the screen the contact information for Nancy and Tiffany, so if there's any follow-up questions. But we're now ready to take questions, and I up to you, Bobby, how you want to manage the question answer session.
I see that there's a question for Nancy. I have a query, need to ask to Nancy, please unmute me. It's in the question and answer section.
Okay.
And I see a question about if there's a software program. I can answer that about the software program. I used at the beginning something called NVivo. And I have to say that starting with the open coding and putting all my information in NVivo, it helped to sort and draw on some key words and phrases. I found after that, when I put everything in it, I found the interaction with the data, it wasn't as intimate for me using NVivo. So I ended up printing out a lot of the information from what I entered into NVivo. I ended up using the hard copies of it to interact more with the data, and then get on to the other coding processes. I found that it was good for the open coding, but then I sort of stopped, and I was using the data more without using in vivo, but that is a software tool. For grounded theory, I know I took a look at, it was in 2005 from Glass saying that computer sorting is not for grounded theory, that you need more hands-on with grounded theory. And like I said, I found that more after I entered all the information, but initially it did help a little bit.
And me I did use in vivo, and similar to Nancy, there was a lot of documents, there was a lot of transcripts from the interviews and all of my field notes and observations. And what I found in vivo was most helpful for was the sorting and moving data around. So when I did my master's research, everything had to be done on paper and by typing everything over and over. And through this, it was just a simple moving and dragging, and I could, I could move things into 2 different categories or 3 different categories. And that's why I was able to tell you it came from, there were 96 references from 17 sources, because the in vivo software keeps that all organized for you. For data analysis, I agree with Nancy that, to me, that requires the human element of synthesizing that information for the themes. And that's when I took over, but I found it extremely useful for sorting all of the different data sources. And I should mention, one of my sources was also a survey. So there was some quantitative data that I could also put into in vivo and pull it into those categories in my framework analysis.
Okay, I see one question on the screen from Suchitra. She asked, or he or she asked, how important is conceptual framework in research? Can you skip this while writing a research proposal? So for both of you, Nancy and Tiffany, how important was it for you to have a conceptual framework before you got into your study?
I would say for me, with change, there is so much change theory research that's happened. And where case study is a little bit different is you spend a lot of time doing a literature review, and you spend a lot of time gathering what's currently in the field around a concept like change. And so for me, I looked at change theory from the 1940s until now, and from that came up with a conceptual framework based on change. And so from that, I had a really clear kind of direction for how I was going to compare the data to that theoretical framework. And so for case study, I found that was really, really critical for me. I focused on the 3 phases of change. And so when I was doing the analysis, I was always thinking about those 3 phases of change that come through clearly in the change research. So for case study, the conceptual or the theoretical framework is really critical.
And I would say the same. I would say the same going back to the conceptual framework for grounded theory, just as Tiffany was explaining. It certainly allowed also a checkpoint to keep going back to and looking to see that because a lot of the thought was done before, thinking on, and for grounded theory and without having a hypothesis, you certainly had to wait and see where the data was going to take you, but the understanding of the decision-making and implementation and having ideas around that from the theory perspective, and also knowing I guess my own personality, I needed to have something down and be able to follow having that conceptual framework.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Nancy and
Yes.
Tiffin, a wonderful presentation under the guidance of Dr. Kane. Really, ground theory is a systematic methodology, and you describe very well. But my question is, ground theory is successful only in social sciences or the other sciences also? Hello? Hello?
Yes. So
Question is, the ground theory is only successful in social sciences researches or all researches, maybe in sciences or other humanities or... Hello?
Are you answering that, Ken, or was that for me or Ken?
Any of you.
Well, go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Well,
What do you think?
I found it worked very well with social sciences for sure. And also knowing that with grounded theory, you can also have a mixed method of qualitative and quantitative. So that also gives, additionally for other, for other studies that I could see it working. I only use the qualitative part of it, but certainly you can use a mixed method with grounded theory.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Niklesh have a question. Niklesh, can you hear me? Niklesh?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please.
My name is Ajay Kumar, faculty from Vijayanagar College of Commerce, Hyderabad. Mr. Ken, I have a query with you regarding the qualitative type of research, which normally used for the assessment of like attitudes or opinions behavior. So in such a case, situation function researcher insights and impressions, where it may be generate even non-qualitative form. So what are the techniques we need to focus on in case of qualitative type of research?
I think I could start with that. I think the methods that are really important in qualitative research are making the direct connection with the participants who are going to provide you the data for your research. So for interviewing and for observing people in their natural settings, you really need to set up a relationship of trust with those individuals. So in my case, I needed to go visit with the participants before I interviewed, so they would understand my reason or what were my intentions for doing the research, so that they would trust me. Because if in qualitative research, when you talk about its perceptions or attitudes or those kinds of things, you want people to tell you their honest perceptions and honest attitudes. And they're more likely to do that if they trust you and they understand your motivation for the research. So I think one of the most critical parts of all of the case study and the qualitative aspect of case study is working closely with your participants and recognizing their knowledge and their expertise and building a relationship with them so you can get the most genuine and honest information.
And I would echo that. It's a good question because I went back and forth with that thought too, to know that you are getting good, valid, solid feedback. And I actually included it in my research, in my dissertation as well, sort of through some observations and note-taking, making some focused descriptions on how people were responding, their comfort level, how open they seemed to be, certain things that they would do within interviews, just to sort of test it to the trustworthiness of what they were saying, just to get a feel for, to try and make sure that they're just not responding just to get the questions done. I wanted to make sure, as Tiffany said, that trustworthiness was there and being comfortable. And that was almost like a measuring stick as well, doing the interviews and speaking with people just to make sure that the answers were authentic and real.
excuse me, a question to Dr. Tiffany. Many times we find the researchers, we find in comparison, especially in comparison between two studies or two in the sample, we say in the title we say it is a case study. Does this mean that when the study is concerned or concentrated on a special sample, it is especially for that case, or we can generalize the case when the case study? Can we apply it with apply the study with other, or can we generalize the information or the experiment? Or is it, when we say case study, is it limited for a certain study or certain sample or certain society?
Yes, well, that's a really good question. And that's a question that often comes up with case study. And it is my particular case study, and many case studies are focused on a particular sample in a particular region or area, and it's bounded, or there's limits or boundaries around it. And what I would encourage people when they think about generalizability is Stake talks about naturalistic generalization. So I can't say that what happens in one English-speaking district in New Brunswick applies to every school district in the world, but the reader or the person who consumes the research may see that there's connections to their own experience based on what the participants said in their interviews, or what the data that came out of some of the documents, etc. So I like to think of the naturalistic generalization, where the reader of the research decides, does this fit my context or does it not fit my context? And then determine whether it is generalizable to your area.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions from the participants and the panelists?
There is no questions from my side. Ravi Govindaraj from Qatar. But yes, I'd like to really appreciate the team, Mr. Ken, Ms. Tiffany, and Ms. Nancy. Very nicely presented and very nicely answered. It's an informative session. And for the viewers, yes, I can say that there are many viewers, they were asking for your PPTs. Probably they can note down the last slide, what still it is on. You've given your email IDs. The participants, you can note it down and you can contact them so that you will get whatever you want. On top of it, you'll also get the same details through YouTube as well, since it is live streaming is going on. So that's the information. Hats up to the team, entire team. Fantastic show.
Thank you very much.
Let me introduce a little. Yes. Let me introduce a little about Nancy ma'am and Tiffany ma'am. So here it goes. Nancy is the Director of Curriculum and Translation of the Anglophone East School District. She received her PhD in Education Studies at the University of New Brunswick in 2020. In her nearly 30 years of her career in education, she has held teaching and leadership roles at the school, district, and university levels of the education system. She was the recipient of the Vince Sunderland Memorial Award for Outstanding Educational Leadership, Laureate Governor's Award for Excellence in Public Administration, and was selected as one of the Canadians' Outstanding Principals. Congratulations, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, yes, speaking about Tiffany ma'am, Tiffany is the Director of the Change Leadership Unit at the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. She was awarded the Dr. Williams S. Lewis Doctoral Fellowship and earned her PhD in Education Studies at the University of New Brunswick in 2020. As a teacher, Tiffany received the New Brunswick Teachers Association Excellence in Teaching Award. Wow. In her 28 years of her career in education, she has served in roles such as school counselor, resource teacher for special education, literacy specialist, school administrator, and change leader. We are really proud to have you along with Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
And
Thank you
feel
so
free
much.
to
Thank you
reach
so
out.
much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the wonderful session. And having said that, there is a student who always comes and makes the, the regular attendance. I wanted to mention her name again. Professor Hemlata, once again, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Shivashakti, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
sir.
Bobby, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Bye.
And Vasif sir also. He's also
Oh,
there.
yeah, Dr. Washir, sorry. How can I forget a person?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Very kind of you.
For a second, you can just switch on your video, sir.
Oh, very kind of you. Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Thank
Really,
you.
today we had a good presentation and it is very informative. Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. All of those who wake up too early in the morning, 6 o'clock you started. Great you are. Thank you very much.
They got double sweet today. Being Sunday today, they got double sweet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on.
Mr. Wasap, thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Very kind of you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Premlata, thank you very much.
Dr. Premalatam, thank you so much. Dr. Bobby, ma'am, thank you so much. Dr. Ravi, sir, thank you so much. Dr. Ravi Govindraj, sir, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all the participants and thank you all the participants. Thank you all the panelists and thank you all the participants.
Now you can enjoy the breakfast.
Okay. Okay, thank you, folks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. Kindred, sir. Vasif sir, see you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again, sir. Again, thank you, sir.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Kemalada, ma'am, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Tomorrow we will meet you, ma'am.
Sure,
Yes,
I'll be
sir.
here
Thank you. Thank you.
for the whole session.
Thank you. Dr. Premalada, ma'am, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bobby, ma'am.
Madam.
Hi. Thank
Completed
you.
4
Bobby.
days.
Yes.
Yes, Premlata ma'am,
Ma'am,
see you.
Bobby, ma'am, we are ready for next session. Inauguration function today, 4
Yes.
o'clock, at 4 o'clock.
Day 1 of the next program.
I'm always with you all, okay?
Thank you. Yes. I will send you. I will send you a link and ID. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.